Thank you again for being here. Thank you for worshiping with us. For those of you who missed the intro, my name is Guston. I'm an elder and associate pastor here. And currently we are going through a series called Free at Last, where we're going through the book of Exodus, and we're seeing how God is a God who makes himself known to us. And today we're going to look at how the enemy makes himself known. And I don't know about you, but I don't spend a whole lot of time studying the enemy. I don't study Satan and his ways, but really knowing the enemy is very important. I was reading The Art of War by Sun Tzu, which is quoted over and over throughout any leadership, military especially. And it is scary how tactically proficient Satan is. His ways, his maneuvers, how he comes at God's people, it is scary to know that this person, this created being is after you. And how he attacks you and how he attacks the community of Christ and how he attacks the church and how he attacks society. It is scary. One of the quotes that is often quoted from Sun Tzu is, "If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle." So this morning we are here to look at Exodus chapter 5 to find out who the enemy is. In this chapter we'll see the nature of Satan and how he comes at believers. He comes at us by being defiant. He comes at us by being destructive. And he comes at us by being divisive. Nope. Stand by. We good? All right. Exodus chapter 5, starting verse 1. Later, Moses and Aaron went in and said to Pharaoh, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival for me in the wilderness." But Pharaoh responded, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him by letting Israel go? I don't know the Lord, and besides, I will not let Israel go." So, at first reading, you may question, what is this festival that Moses and Aaron are asking Pharaoh for? I thought they were supposed to ask for freedom. You know? What's that movie by Charlton Heston? Let my people go. But when we look closer at the culture and the background of this request, what this festival that they're asking for, the word is Hajj. It's where we get the word Haji. It's a pilgrimage. And what he was asking for would have been familiar to the Egyptians. In ancient Egypt, there are accounts of Egyptians just disappearing for a few days. And it's because they're making a pilgrimage out into the wilderness for worship. So Moses and Aaron aren't chickening out. They're just using a language that Pharaoh would have recognized and would have understood. And requesting 3 days was not not chickening out. In those days, when you negotiated, you started low, and then you worked your way up to the real request. We see this in Genesis 23 when Abraham negotiates with Ephraim. He wants a cave and the field. But what does he do? He asks for the cave, and then after he's granted that request, he asks for the cave and the field. So it's just common practice back then to ask for this request, and if you're agreeable, okay, maybe you'll be agreeable to more until we get to what I really desire. So again, Moses and Aaron aren't chickening out or coming to Pharaoh with like a weak posture. They're just they're approaching him as the culture would dictate at that time. So they asked for this 3-day festival because the Lord, the God of Israel. Now, when you read your Bible, many Bible translations have Lord. At times, it's all caps. And what that means is the word Yahweh is used. So what Moses and Aaron are saying is, this is what Yahweh, the God of Israel, says. And Pharaoh's response is, who is this Yahweh? And what this is telling is not only did Pharaoh not know who Yahweh was. I mean, in that day, Pharaoh was a form of a deity himself. So, who is this other God, your God, to tell me what to do with my slaves? But more than that, the Israelites had been in that country for 400 years. And Pharaoh doesn't know who Yahweh is? That's because while in Egypt, the Israelites started worshiping the gods of Egypt. They would worship the god of Osiris and Baal. And they would, so when Pharaoh looked at these people and saw that, where's this Yahweh? I see statues of gods I recognize, but I don't recall this name Yahweh. So one, it's an honest question. Who is Yahweh? But it's also a defiant one. It's a question of, even if this Yahweh is real, who is he to tell me what to do with my people? And this is the first showing of who Satan is. Now, keep in mind that this interaction is much, there's much more going on here than what first meets the eye. This isn't Moses and Aaron versus Pharaoh. This isn't Egypt versus Israel. This is Satan versus God. Now, it may be confusing sometimes to look at Egypt and see all these gods and wonder, well, they weren't worshiping Satan. They're worshiping Baal and Osiris. But and we tend to do that, don't we? We have two categories. We have God and other gods. And under this other gods, we have two categories. We have, Baal and Osiris and Isis, but then there's Satan. But in reality, it's God or Satan. And that's how That's how Satan gets us. You may be okay with thinking, oh, I'm not worshiping Satan. I'm just doing this other thing. Well, that other thing, indirectly, is worshiping Satan. And that's what C.S. Lewis's book, Screwtape Letters, points out. In this book, it's this more senior demon is training his nephew, Wormwood, in how to be a better demon. And one of the things he talks about in one of his lessons is letting them basically be ignorant of us. For while if they are aware of us, it's more fun. We get to do this, this, and this. But it's much more effective if they have no clue. If they dismiss the spiritual realities as magic, or as, oh, we can take care of that with sciences or psychoanalysts. If we can get them to believe in those things, we've won. So while we may comfort ourselves by thinking, I'm not worshiping Satan, anything less than worshiping God is worshiping Satan. Another quote by Sun Tzu: in all fighting, the direct method may be used for joining battle, but indirect methods will be needed in order to secure victory. See, it's these sneaky devices, the subtle ways that Satan comes at us, are the ones that will get us. We need to be aware of Satan and his ways so that when things come up in our lives, we can recognize them and stop the enemy before they have a chance to succeed. So Pharaoh asks, who is Yahweh? He asks this question that really he's been asking. He started asking in Genesis when he approached Eve, like, who is this God that he would give you all this and restrict this good thing? Look at it, it's beautiful. It's good for taste. God isn't really good. Who is this God? That's how he gets us. It's this question that Pharaoh asks, that really the rest of Exodus and really the whole of the Bible spends explaining to us, who is Yahweh? Who is this Yahweh? The enemy is also destructive. Exodus 5:3, they answered, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go on a 3-day trip into the wilderness so that we may sacrifice to the Lord, or else he may strike us with a plague or sword. So again, they're trying to show how urgent this request is. They as far as negotiations go, they're telling Pharaoh, hey, better than three days in the wilderness than us dead. If we don't listen to Yahweh, this is what could happen. Please let us go. But Pharaoh continued with defiance, and he shows how little he thinks of Yahweh. And the king of Egypt, verse 4, said to them, Moses and Aaron, why are you causing the people to neglect your work? Get to your labor. Pharaoh also said, look, the people of the land are so numerous, and you would stop them from their labor. This interesting interaction, Pharaoh lets us know that the Israelites are neglecting their work. And what this suggests is, after the good news of chapter 4 that God has heard your cries and he's going to redeem you, he's going to free you, and they bowed down low and worshiped, they got up and started packing. They started slacking. Why detail a car you're going to give away? What's the point? So, in light of God's promises, they got lazy. And Pharaoh even goes after their identity. Instead of God of the Hebrews, the Hebrew people, the Israelites, he said people of the land. And when people are suffering and struggling, and one of the worst things they can do is start identifying with their condition. When they start to say, this is who I am. It's when hopelessness settles in. That's what Pharaoh is trying to do. You're not Hebrews. You're not the Israelites. You're not the people of Yahweh. You are people of the land. Because Satan wants to destroy your identity. He wants you to forget that you're adopted. Like Larry preached last week. He wants you to forget that you're a child of God. He wants you to identify with your sinful condition and lose all hope and give up. Why even get out of bed today? I'm just going to fail again. Because Satan is destructive. In that day, verse 6, Pharaoh commanded the overseers of the people as well as their foremen, don't continue to supply the people with straw for making bricks as before. They must go and gather straw for themselves, but require the same quota of bricks from them as they were making before. Do not reduce it, for they are slackers. That is why they are crying out, let us go and sacrifice to our God. Impose heavier work on them, on the men. Then they will be occupied with it and not pay attention to deceptive words. So God shows up. He's given his people a promise of deliverance, and the enemy doubles down. He makes the Israelites' life harder. And this may seem strange, this not giving them straw. But in order to make good bricks, good adobe bricks that they would be making, they would need straw. If they don't have straw, they would need a kiln, and which would be more money, which would be more labor, which would be more time. So they use straw to make these mud bricks, adobe bricks, so they could bake them in the sun and do their work. So the overseers passed this word on. Verse 10, the overseers and the foremen of the people went out and said to them, this is what Pharaoh says, I'm not giving you straw. Go get straw yourselves and wherever you can find it. But there will be no reduction in your workload. So the people scattered throughout the land of Egypt to gather stubble for straw. So before, they were given straw, most likely in bundles, and it seems like there would be fields that would be reserved for straw for making this brick. So they would grow the straw, cut it, dry it, and deliver it to the brick makers to make the adobe bricks. No more. Those fields are reserved, untouchable. These other fields that use straw for other reasons, you have to grab the stubble from those fields. And what the stubble is you have a stalk, and there'd be a portion from the ground, a few inches up, and it would vary depending on the person operating the sickle, that would be left. So now they have to gather that to make bricks. And it says, the people scattered throughout the land of Egypt. And what this is implying is before you'd have a brick maker, maybe one or two members of the family would be brick makers. And they would go and make bricks, and the rest of the family could, make bread, tend to the garden. Now the whole family is involved. It's so hard to harvest this straw that you have to bend over and pick it up strand by strand. They have to scatter throughout all of Egypt to gather the straw, gather the stubble. So now you go from one or two members of the family working, slaving, toiling, to now the whole family is out in the hot sun. Can you imagine kids getting calluses on their hand from picking the straw in the hot sun before they were at home? The mother, the wife, now instead of at home tending to the house, out in the hot sun, in the wind. To just give you an idea of how hard this life was. Here is an account from Egypt of the life of a brickmaker. He is dirtier than vines, or pigs from treading under his mud. His clothes are stiff with clay. His leather belt is going to ruin. Entering into the wind, he is miserable. His sides ache, since he must be outside in a treacherous wind. His arms are destroyed with technical work. What he eats is the bread of his fingers, and he washes himself only once a season. He is simply wretched through and through. So that's the life the whole family is now involved in. So you go from maybe a few people of a family involved in this life. This Moses shows up talking about Yahweh, and now we're all working in the fields. We're all in the sun. We're all being beaten by this wind. Can you imagine what that would have done to their home life? To those families, this interaction? Who is Yahweh? It was much better before he showed up. I can tell you that. Deliverance, I don't see deliverance. My life is much harder now before he showed up. So Satan's destructiveness shows us sometimes he goes after the family. Often he goes after the family. Because he knows if he can get you alone, he's got you. If you're separated from your family, it's you versus your family, he's got you. Because the enemy is destructive. Another saying by Sun Tzu, if he is taking his ease, give him no rest. If his forces are united, separate them. Again, he is tactically proficient. Verse 13, the overseers insisted, finish your assigned work each day, just as you did when straw was provided. Then the Israelite foremen, whom Pharaoh's slave drivers had set over the people, were beaten and asked, Why haven't you finished making your prescribed number of bricks yesterday or today as you did before? So the overseers are going after the foremen. So the overseers are Egyptian, and the foremen are Hebrew. And the overseers are beating the foremen for the lack of productivity of the slaves. Now, I tried and I researched as well as I could, and I couldn't find any confirmation of this, but I also didn't find any contradiction. It's my assumption that the foreman then in turn beat the slaves. They did this, why I'm assuming this is because they would want to show Pharaoh, look, we're doing everything we can to increase productivity. We're not slacking. Look, what we're even doing to our own people. So what's happening is, how do you think the slaves viewed the foreman? See how he's even destroying people within the community? So he's destroying the family. He's destroying them physically with all this physical labor. Now there's trouble within the people because the enemy is destructive. So the foremen go to Pharaoh. And they plead their case. Pharaoh responds with slackers. Verse 17, you are slackers. That is why you are saying, let us go sacrifice to the Lord. Now get to work. No straw will be given to you, but you must produce the same quantity of bricks. The Israelite foremen saw that they were in trouble when they were told, you cannot reduce your daily quota of bricks. Pharaoh's response isn't surprising. He discounts their cry as simple laziness. And then he reiterates the demand for the same quota of bricks. So again, after bowing down and worshiping God at the news that he had heard their prayers, their labor is increased, their family is suffering more, there's strife within their own people. And next, Satan goes after their community. Because Satan is divisive. Verse 20. When the foreman left Pharaoh, they confronted Moses and Aaron, who stood waiting to meet them. So Moses and Aaron were standing either in support or just eagerness to find out what was going on, what the result was. They wanted to hear the report, and the foreman blamed Moses and Aaron. They say, you must have put the sword in Pharaoh's hand. You have dealt with this whole situation wrong. So now you have the people against the leaders. See how Satan divides? See how Satan tries to, again, get you on your own. If you've watched Animal Planet and you see footage of the safari, what do the predators do? Do they go after the core of the pack? No, they go for the stragglers. They look for the ones that are out of the group. And they go after them because that's a much easier target. That's what Satan's trying to do. He's trying to divide them because it will be a much easier target. So Moses goes back to Yahweh. And it may be confusing. The way the CSB writes it, it seems like God and like Moses went back to a physical place, like he went back to his prayer closet and was praying to God. But other translations put it, Moses turned back to God. And he questioned God. He expressed his frustration with God. He asked, why have you caused trouble for your people? For this people. Sorry. Not your people, but this people. Perhaps he's questioning God's loyalty to them. Why did you ever send me? Questioning God's wisdom and choosing Moses. Like, look, Lord, I told you back in chapter 4, remember me, guy who stutters? Yeah, I told you. And you haven't done a thing. Moses accuses God. See, when I read chapter 5, what sticks out is the word should. And beginning of the sermon or beginning of the service, I asked you to reflect on your life and pay attention to the shoulds, the expectations that we have. Because, again, if we examine our life in the light of what we deserve and what we get, we praise God for his grace and mercy. And when we examine our life in light of the shoulds of God's promises, according to God's promise, this should have happened, that should have happened. It should be like this. It produces lament. And I think what this passage is also showing is when we examine our life in light of the shoulds of God's action or perceived inaction. God should have done this. God shouldn't have done that. It reveals our idols. That's what chapter 5 is about. I don't know about you, but if I were writing this thing, Exodus would end in chapter 5. Like Moses and Aaron would walk in, Pharaoh would realize who they represent, kiss the ring, go. Send me a postcard. But he doesn't. God could have softened Pharaoh's heart and been like, Yahweh, go. But he doesn't. Does this line up with any of our expectations? How this should have gone? It's because God isn't satisfied with just physical freedom. God was going after more than just brick making. Again, the Israelites were worshiping other gods. They had adopted many of the gods of Egypt. And if he would have just softened Pharaoh's heart and let them go, I can tell you what would be in that wagon of the Israelites leaving Egypt. Would have been a lot of statues. And idols they would have held on to. Because, oh, Pharaoh wasn't too bad of a guy. He let us go. Or maybe Moses, Aaron, they're great negotiators. Good job. But God is after more. Physical freedom is good, yes. Don't get me wrong. But God is after true freedom. And that's why we have to take roads that we may not have chosen for ourselves. God isn't willing to let us settle with what is good. He wants what's best. And so we may have to take a road for his namesake. Psalm 23:3. According to his great wisdom, he won't let idols live in our hearts. And that's what would happen if he let our shoulds come true. Now, I'll admit, chapter 5 is pretty bleak. It's pretty dark. You go in with great expectations, and it ends with Moses complaining to God, you haven't done anything at all. And I was tempted to stop there. Tempted to leave it at verse 23 because, let's be honest, it doesn't always end up well. Psalm 88, one of the darkest laments in the Psalter, ends with no hope. There's no coming out of the pit. There's no healing. It just ends. And how many of our lives are like that? How many circumstances have you been through where it doesn't get better? That's life sometimes. That's the Christian life sometimes. Christians get cancer. Children of believers die. We suffer. That's the reality. Christians aren't exempt from suffering. But there's chapter 6, verse 1. There's always a chapter 6, verse 1. We may not be exempt from suffering, but we are exempt from hopelessness. And that is what is so great about how this lined up. We may be tempted to end at chapter 5 and leave it at that, but there's always chapter 6, verse 1. In this life, we may go through suffering upon suffering, and it may not end up well. But this isn't our home. Christ is going to come back, and he'll make all things new. And that is where our hope is. That is how we will endure. Because the Lord's reply to Moses, now you will see what I will do with Pharaoh, because of a strong hand he will let them go, and because of a strong hand he will drive them out of this land. Yes, the enemy may be defiant. He may be destructive. He may be divisive. But he's defeated. And so, please, hear me. I am not trying to make light of your suffering. I'm trying to shine a light on your suffering. Your suffering is real. It's painful, whatever it is. But please know, it's not the end. And God is so good. He knows we'll forget. He knows we'll be tempted to end at chapter 5 and just stop there. That's why he gives us reminders, physical things that we can hold on to help us remember the reality of who we are. We're not people of the land. We're children of God. So as real as you can taste this juice and feel the bread and smell the communion, as real as that is, know that you are a child of God and you have a hope. Please pray with me. Heavenly Father, thank you for being so good to us. Thank you for not giving us the shoulds that we impose on you or even on ourselves. Thank you for not letting us settle for what is good, but always giving us what is best. Lord, help us to humble ourselves before our brothers and sisters and be honest about where we are, our struggles, about our family, about what we may be going through. Help us to not be separated from the community of God that you have called us to. Lord, as we come before the table today, please help us to be honest with you about the shoulds that we have imposed on you, about who we thought you would be to us. Help us to know, not just intellectually know, but to know who you are, experience who you are, the goodness of your mercy, the goodness of your grace, the sweetness of your love to us. Because that is what will get us through our suffering and our trials.